I'm starting part 2 of this analysis and commentary on the Sane Society with the knowledge that this series will be longer than 2 parts. I have to admit, this is a bit frustrating, and I'd really love to be that magical content creator who can compress huge, complex ideas, histories, and theories into something simple, simple, entertaining factlets. I do love those short, sweet, and entertaining videos as much as everyone else does. But I can't seem to do it myself. Rather, when I tackle a topic, especially one as profound as this book, I find myself positively thrilled. It becomes an ASMR-like response. I feel alive, energized, excited, and I get this massive endorphin release. I need to play with the idea. I need to describe it, to try to capture the idea with all the emotional force that I experience. And I just can't leave anything out. This is why this channel is always going to be a work of love and not really a serious attempt to become famous, or at least not a particularly good attempt at becoming famous. So as a result, in today's episode, and in great detail, we're moving from Erich Fromm's analysis of the essential human character, and instead we're going to follow Fromm as he deploys his ideas as a tool for assessing the sanity of modern society. In part 1, we laid out how the mature, sane human was capable of inclusive love and independence, how a sane person was able to both connect to the world in love and was able to deploy his independence and objectively interpret the world. Fromm finds the modern world and the economic systems that we've created as being entirely inappropriate for a mature, sane human. This isn't a limited criticism of aspects of how humanity lives currently, but a thorough rejection of the entire basis, the entire objective, and the entire functioning of the modern social structure. I found it deeply profound, and I hope that you'll join me to find out why. A brief context. Fromm starts his analysis in chapter 5 of the book. The first place that he goes is to look at some of the well-known social issues of the 19th century. He talks about the massive inequality in wealth creation, he talks about the social repression, and he outlines how the majority of people living under class systems were oppressed by an irrational authority. But by the 20th century, and notably in the period Fromm is writing, many of these issues have been addressed. We have greater distribution of wealth, greater individual freedom, less irrational authority, and more general participation by everyone. Unfortunately, quote, "we are not in danger of becoming slaves anymore, but of becoming robots," close quote. While we have achieved most of our 19th century aims for social improvement, we can observe that many people suffer from mental disorders, self-enforced conformity, and are reduced to blind, unsatisfiable consumers. They are participating fully, they are much more free to decide how to behave, at least in the private sphere, but we live in a system that has separated them from their mature human potential. Alienation. The primary driving force that Fromm identifies is an almost ubiquitous alienation. Fromm's definition of alienation has similarities with Marx, but it is a much more encompassing term. Marx's alienation was driven by private ownership of capital, and although it undeniably causes suffering, that suffering was experienced mostly by workers. Fromm's alienation is closer to a spiritual sickness, a deep well of emptiness that affects every participant in modern society and regardless of their class. Whereas Marx's alienation was a type of material poverty and lack of agency, Fromm's alienation cannot be treated through redistribution or participation or a class consciousness, because it's a form of mental and spiritual deprivation that can only be addressed through an entirely different relationship between individuals and their world. It is a classless problem, and it is not an ownership one. Quantification and Abstractification. The fundamental changes in contemporary capitalism is both scale and scope. It is one of ever-increasing size, of companies, of bureaucracies, both private and public, and the multiplying tendrils of influence these impersonal institutions have wrought in every aspect of our lives. The size and scope has reduced our lives down to an existence experienced as pure abstraction. This abstraction is easy to see in large manufacturing or commercial enterprises. Individuals, workers, managers, executives, and owners each only see a small part of the huge machine that is the modern corporation. Business is driven by numbers, by many individuals working on isolated tasks in isolated departments, with no person able to interact in any concrete way with the totality of the company, with no person having any real sense of ownership or responsibility for day-to-day activities, nor having any human relationship to production or to products. Each worker and all managers find themselves ensconced in little fiefdoms of specialization, accounting, engineering, human resources, or the executive suite. Each exists with little in common with the vast majority of people who ostensibly work with them. And even after a year or a decade or a lifetime of toil for the same organization, the majority will never meet most of their co-workers. In order for us to manage the demands of that environment, each of us begins to think and work in abstractions. We begin to break everything down to numbers, part numbers, inventories. We stress trends, balances, and most importantly, over value measured in dollars. This abstraction has now seeped beyond the fields of business and government and has invaded every single facet of our lives. It is normal for us to discuss a disaster in terms of millions or billions of dollars in damage, to discuss our own stuff in terms of their cost, their value as assets or as debts, and as much as we discuss its usefulness. This applies to necessities like a vehicle, and it applies to symbols of love, like a wedding ring that you save 3 months' salary to buy. Similarly, we reduce our own value as a productive person to a career measured by its value in the market. We then treat ourselves like commodities to be sold, so we develop ourselves by investing in education to increase our market value. We market ourselves with our clothes, our resumes, and our networks of contacts that have replaced our friends. We know that our companies value us in direct proportion to how much they think we produce, and even more by how costly we are to replace. This doesn't disturb us. It is the abstract, quantified, mathematical, economical marketplace that we mistakenly call our home, our community, and our country. This abstractification and quantification doesn't stop there. Our relationship to technology continues to evolve, and at an ever-increasing rate. It's measured in kilobytes or megabytes, now gigabytes, and slowly in the future, terabytes. Our relationship with our health becomes a series of scores. 200 milligrams per deciliter of cholesterol, a resting heartbeat of 77, and a fear that our BMI has now exceeded 24. The numbers constantly evolve along with our medical science, and the numbers that were worrying us in the 1990s seem unimportant to us in 2022. Our planet is surrounded by thousands of satellites that we can't see, don't understand, but yet interact with. We watch the news and hear about death rates in the thousands or in the tens of thousands. We are told we are excited by the Dow Jones, which just went over 36,000 points. We're told to be amazed at Bitcoins worth tens of thousands of dollars. But at the same time, we're worried that inflation has increased over 5%. Fromm writes, quote, "We live in figures and abstractions. Since nothing is concrete, nothing is real. Everything is possible, factually and morally. Science fiction is not different from science fact. Nightmares and dreams from the events of next year. Man has been thrown out from any definite place whence he can overlook and manage his life or the life of society. He is driven faster and faster by forces which were originally created by him. In this wild whirl he thinks, figures, busy with abstractions, more and more remote from concrete life." Close quote. Idolatry. Fromm asserts that we are perhaps the greatest idolaters that have ever existed. Idolatry is usually explained as a person worshipping a material thing. However, idolatry has a deeper meaning as well. It is not only the worship of something material, but worshipping something we've created ourselves. We, the human race, has created all these processes, organizations, tools, and abstract systems of thought. It was our passion, persistence, intelligence, and strength that brought these things into being. But now that we created them, and now that we stand as creators before our creations, we throw ourselves down into submission, experiencing these things as larger, stronger, and more important than we are. Quote, "The prophets of monotheism did not denounce heathen religions as idolatrous, primarily because they worship several gods instead of one. The essential difference between monotheism and polytheism is not one of number of gods. It lies in the fact of self-alienation. Man spends his energy, his artistic capacities on building an idol, and then he worships that idol, which is nothing but the result of his own human effort. His life forces have flown into a thing, and this thing, having become an idol, is not experienced as a result of his own productive effort, but as something apart from himself, over and against him, which he worships and to which he submits. As the prophet Hosea says, 'Assur will not save us. We will not ride upon horses, neither will we say any more to the work of our hands, you are the gods, for in thee the fatherless finds love.' Idolatrous man bows down to the work of his own hands. The idol represents his own life force in an alienated form." Close quote. The experience of alienation. The massive scale, the complexity, the abstraction, the commodification, and the idolatry of our world are key components of Fromm's alienation. Quote, "By alienation is meant a mode of experience in which the person experiences himself as an alien. He has become, one might say, estranged from himself. He does not experience himself as the center of his world, as a creator of his own acts, but his acts and their consequences have become his master, whom he obeys or whom he may even worship. The alienated person is out of touch with himself, as he is out of touch with any other person. He, like the others, are experienced as things are experienced, with the senses and with common sense, but at the same time without being related to oneself and to the world outside productively." Close quote. This alienation is perhaps most pronounced in the emphasis we put on ourselves as consumers. In principle, Fromm believes that the act of consumption should be a concrete human act, an act where we employ our sensing, feeling, and judging for the purpose of satisfying our bodily needs and aesthetic tastes. But in our culture, there is actually very little of that. Our senses have been abrogated to artificially created wants, driven by advertising and conformity. We pursue goods that have been produced in artificial systems by humans acting as alienated machines. We don't buy clothes, we buy labels and lifestyles. We don't buy drinks to quench our thirst, we buy brands and slogans. We purchase these goods with money, which is in itself an inhuman artificial idea, utterly intangible aside from some scraps of paper. The complete lack of individual initiative and directly applied productive effort would be entirely foreign to our ancestors. Reduced to consumers. The idea of consumption and of buying more and better things was originally an attempt to live a happier and more satisfying life. Consumption was intended as a means to an end. However, it has been replaced by consumption as an end in itself. In the past, ownership was a thing of stewardship and of pride. People took good care of relatively few things and would only part from them when they could no longer be used. But, quote, there is very little left of this sense of property today. One loves the newness of the thing bought and is ready to betray it when something newer has appeared, close quote. Another fantastic example of our new attitude to property is the modern tourist with his camera. Where travel used to be associated with culture, experience, and the broadening or development of the traveler, now it is a furious race from place to place, mostly with camera in front of face, to capture snapshots of landmarks without ever really experiencing that place. Instead, we capture and consume these places, the object of our leisure travel, and use these digital mementos to populate our self-marketing travel blogs. Proof that we are brave enough, wealthy enough, successful enough to breach a new level of aspirational consumption. The consumption of travel is about consumption, not travel. People as commodities. This alienation exists in our person-to-person relationships as well. Quote, what is a modern man's relationship to his fellow man? It is one between two abstractions, two living machines who use each other. The employer uses the ones whom he employs, the salesman uses his customers. Everybody is to everybody else a commodity, always to be treated with a certain friendliness because even if he is not of use now, he may be later, close quote. This is obvious and has been frequently pointed out by many critical observers of the modern capitalism. But it extends well into non-commercial life as well. Consider the average libertarian, free thinker who screams and resists paying any tax to support the nation that at the same time he purports to love. Consider the individual who condemns the poor as lazy and who wouldn't give $1 of his hard-earned money to this loser. Yet the same people then look at a soldier or a police officer and expect these officials to be ready to lay down their lives for their fellow citizens. Why, when a human being puts on a uniform, does he suddenly stop being the same human he was a moment before? Is this not an objectification of service as a vocation and as an identity rather than as an expression of human duty and responsibility that we all share? But this self-commodification doesn't end with civil servants. We extend it to ourselves as well. Quote, his body, his mind, and his soul are his capital, and his task in life is to invest it favorably, to make a profit of himself. Human qualities like friendliness, courtesy, and kindness are transformed into commodities, into the assets of a personality package, conducive to a higher price on the personality market. If the individual fails in a profitable investment of himself, he feels that he is a failure. If he succeeds, he is a success. Clearly, his sense of his own value always depends on factors extraneous to himself, on the fickle judgment of a market, which decides about his value as it decides about the value of commodities. He, like all commodities that cannot be sold profitably on the market, is worthless as far as his exchange value is concerned, even if his use value may be considerable. Close quote. Conformity and safety. The outcome of this self-commodification, the surrender of our own individual human value, our sense of dignity, is that we suddenly become highly anxious and highly attracted to any form of belonging, even if that means conformity at the expense of our own deeply felt needs and beliefs. Fromm suggests that our current obsession with the outgoing, confident, friendly person is driven by an unconscious desperation to be acceptable, to fit in, and to feel safe. Given that so much of our self-help industry is based around building confidence and influencing others, this would seem to be a deeply held belief. I, for instance, can say that my entire life has been a shame-filled battle against my introverted nature, a sense that somehow my carefulness and difficulty building many superficial relationships was holding me back, and that it is a character flaw rather than just another element of my character. Fromm feels this obsession for accumulative, anxious sociability is more an example of an inner neuroses than it is a natural human desire. In this case, we're not mature, independent, and sane humans, but just submissive to a new authority type. In the 19th century, we had irrational authority of kings, bishops, and other traditional superiors, and we had the rational authority of teachers, professors, mentors, and so on. The irrational one is of superiority and submission and is degrading to the submissive. Rational authority, on the other hand, is one of respect being paid in a relationship where the subject of authority, the student for instance, benefits directly through their submission. Over time, rational authority naturally declines as the student and teacher become equals. But in the 20th century, we've seen the rise of anonymous and alienated authority. Rather than an identifiable object of authority like royalty, we now have an irrational authority that is everywhere but has no specific embodiment in a person. This is the authority that rises from public opinion, that is expressed in online shaming and in semi-serious blogs about fashion crimes. It is the pressure we all feel to not express our individuality in any way that may jeopardize our relationships, our popularity, and certainly never our career. It is the pressure that we all feel, the pressure to be one of the guys so that we don't end up socially isolated and so that we aren't denied career or other opportunities. It is the pressure that keeps the vast majority of us in line despite its amorphous, decentralized, and constantly changing nature. It is the pressure that never relents but can only be pacified in the present, only be held in abeyance through constant, careful conformity. The modern man experiencing the constant alienation of the modern life has no developed capacity to stand up against this pressure. Most of us choose safety through camouflage, through betrayal of our fundamental selves, through constant effort and constant striving. Coming up next. As you can imagine, all this fear, all this pressure, and our inability to protect ourselves through the development of true, healthy connections and love puts us at risk of mental distress. We may be very successful or unsuccessful in this environment, but no one is free from the personal costs associated. Few people are able to protect their integrity and avoid prostituting their bodies and minds to pay for their security. In the next video in this series, I'm going to continue on with the book, discussing how Fromm views the impact this has on our sanity, both collectively and individually. I hope you've enjoyed this series so far, and I really do appreciate you watching this video through and to the end. You've indulged my passion for this book and the ideas that it covers. If you're either as easily entertained as I am or fascinated by my uncontrolled pedantry, then please click the links and subscribe for more just like this. Until that next video drops, this is XCG, wishing you some fun and some happiness while you brave your road to freedom.